My name is Ellen Tate. I'm 25 now, but 5 years ago, my life shattered on my parents' doorstep in Fargo, North Dakota. I stood there in a swirling snowstorm, shivering so hard my bones ached, but their words cut deeper than any winter wind. Don't ever come back here. That cold, final command. I was 20, desperately in love with a man they hated, and that night, I turned my back on everything I knew. The crunch of snow under my boots was the only sound as I walked away, my heart hammering with a betrayal so raw it stole my breath. They were sure I'd break. Certain I'd come crawling back, pleading for forgiveness. I never did. That night was the beginning of a storm, one that raged outside and within me. Their rejection was just the first blow. What followed, the lies, the heartbreak, that desperate moment in the blizzard, almost ended me. But I survived. I endured. And 5 years later, the ones who cast me out were the ones full of regret. Stay with me, and I'll tell you how I forged their contempt into my own strength, and how they paid the price for shutting the door on their own daughter. If your family has ever made you feel like a stranger, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Subscribe, and let's walk this road together. My story starts in the shadow of my older sister. I grew up in Fargo, in a neat middle-class house that felt more like a museum of my parents' ambitions. My mother, Danielle Neal, ruled with a sharp tongue and an endless checklist for my life. Prestigious college, a respectable career, a husband with a title, a doctor or a lawyer would do nicely. My father, Stephen, was her quiet enforcer, his nods of agreement more powerful than any shout. Their dream was a daughter who made them proud at church socials and neighborhood barbecues. But I was Ellen, the daughter who didn't fit the mold. Pamela, my sister, was their masterpiece. By 30, she had her law degree, an office at a local firm, and a fiancé who was practically a carbon copy of my mother's checklist. Pamela has her head on straight, Mom would beam, while I, at 18, sat across the table feeling utterly invisible. Pamela's successes were a constant weight on my shoulders. Every B- on my report card was met with a sigh and, "Your sister never settled for less." I'd stare at my plate, jaw clenched tight, wishing I could vanish. Dad would add his quiet pressure, "You need to focus, Ellen." As if I wasn't already trying. Their words carved out a hollow space inside me, a permanent echo that I was not and would never be enough. So I rebelled. My escape was the real world outside our perfect home, the local cafes, the indie music stores, any place where I could breathe freely. And that's where I found Benjamin Reed. He was 25, a mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a steady, quiet confidence that anchored me. Benjamin worked at a garage on the edge of town, fixing engines and saving every dime to start his own shop. He was everything my parents didn't want for me, no fancy degree, no polished pedigree. But in his beat-up pickup by the Red River, sharing dreams as the sun set, I wasn't being compared to anyone. For the first time, I was just Ellen. When I told my mother about him, her face went rigid. "A mechanic," she said, the words slicing through the room. "You deserve better." My father just stared, his disapproving silence louder than words. They began a campaign of pointed comparisons, dragging me to dinners where Pamela and her perfect fiancé were displayed like trophies. I tried to defend Benjamin, to explain his ambition and his good heart, but my mother cut me off. "He's beneath you," she stated, her lips a thin, cold line. I burned with a humiliation so intense it choked my arguments into silence. To them, Benjamin wasn't a person. He was a problem, a flaw in their blueprint for my life. Even Pamela's attempts to mediate felt hollow. "They just want what's best for you," she'd whisper, but her voice held a distant sympathy. She'd earned her spot in their good graces and wouldn't risk it for me. I was truly on my own, torn in two. Benjamin became my sanctuary. After my shifts at the town cafe, we'd talk for hours, dreaming of a simple, honest life built on our own terms. I started staying out later, avoiding my mother's lectures and my father's disappointed sighs. Every hour with him pulled me further from my family, and the tension at home thickened like ice on a lake. One night, I overheard the truth in a hushed living room conversation. "She's throwing her future away," my mother hissed. "That boy is nothing but trouble." My father murmured something about needing discipline. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. In that moment, I felt like a complete outsider in the only home I'd ever known. Their disappointment wasn't just in my choices, it was in my very existence. By my 20th birthday, I was exhausted from the performance. I just wanted to live, with Benjamin, away from the constant criticism. I had no idea that my longing for freedom was about to ignite a confrontation that would change the course of my life forever. Choosing Benjamin was my first real choice, a step toward a life I wanted, not one that was prescribed for me. But my family had no intention of accepting it. By 20, I'd given up trying to squeeze into their frame of the perfect daughter. Benjamin, with his easy smile and dreams of his own auto shop, became my lifeline. I started staying at his small apartment above the garage. It was nothing fancy, peeling paint, a couch worn thin, but within those walls, I tasted freedom. I'd pack a bag, mutter something about a late study session to my mom, and escape. Each time I left, her silent disapproval followed me like a ghost, and my father's wordless sighs echoed louder than any shout. Pamela tried one last time, her voice laced with a warning disguised as concern. We were in her car. She'd caught me sneaking home at dawn. "You're playing with fire, Ellen," she said. I pulled my hand from hers, exhausted by her cautious, complicit advice. She lived for their approval. She couldn't understand someone ready to live without it. I was done hiding. That weekend, I made it official. I stuffed a duffel bag with my essentials, clothes, a few favorite books, some photos, and told Benjamin I was moving in. The hope that lit up his face was contagious. For a shining moment, I believed we could build our own world, brick by brick, far from their rules. But in a town like Fargo, privacy is an illusion. A neighbor from my mother's book club saw me hauling a box into Benjamin's place. By dinner time, the air in our family home was thick enough to choke on. My mother stood at the kitchen counter, gripping a dish towel so hard her knuckles bleached white. "You're living with that mechanic," she spat, each word a shard of glass. I froze, my fork suspended in midair. Across from me, my father's face had transformed into granite, a stark contrast to the man who once carried me on his shoulders. "Ellen, is this true?" His voice was low, hollow, and heavy with accusation. I simply nodded. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The charade was over. Then, the explosion. Her voice scaled octaves of fury. "You are throwing your life away. He is nobody, Ellen. Nobody. You don't know him." I shot back, my own voice trembling with a defiant heat. My father's palm slammed onto the table, making the silverware jump. "Enough," he roared. "You are embarrassing us." Embarrassing them. The words clicked into place, and something vital snapped inside me. This was never about my safety or happiness. It was about their standing, their reputation. I looked at Pamela, silently studying her plate. No support, not even a glance. I was a stranger, cornered in my own childhood home. The final act played out late into the night, with a blizzard scratching at the windows. Snow piled high, sealing us in with our rage. My mother, her face contorted, pointed a rigid finger toward the front door. "If you choose him, you forget about us. Don't ever come back." The sentence was absolute, glacial. My father stood behind her, a silent sentinel, his jaw clenched. I waited, a desperate, foolish part of me hoping he would step in, would say, "This is our daughter." He said nothing. The betrayal was a physical crush in my chest, merging with the rage. "Fine," I managed, the words scraped raw from my throat. "I don't need you." I grabbed my already packed bag and turned to get my coat. Pamela hurried after me into the hallway. "Ellen, please, just apologize," she whispered, her plea frantic. "They'll calm down." I shook my head, hot tears blurring my vision. "They don't want me, Pamela. They want an echo." She reached out, but I pulled away. Staying was no longer an option. I walked out the front door. The cold was a violent slap, knocking the air from my lungs. Snow whirled around me, clinging to my hair and lashes. My boots plunged into deep, fresh drifts. I paused on the porch and looked back at the house. The warm, golden light glowing from the windows felt like a cruel joke. A loneliness more oppressive than the blizzard descended, weighing me down. Then I turned, adjusted the bag on my shoulder, and walked into the whiteout, toward Benjamin's apartment and an uncertain future, leaving the ghost of the daughter they wanted buried in the snow behind me. For a while, in Benjamin's small apartment above the garage, I convinced myself I had finally built a happy life. After leaving my parents, that tiny space with its creaky floors and single street-facing window felt like a fortress of freedom. Without the weight of my parents' judgment, I could breathe. Benjamin would come home smelling of grease and gasoline, flash his easy smile, and, for a moment, the memory of being cast out would dissolve. We survived on budget meals, laughed when we burned our dinner, and spun elaborate plans for the future. His own auto shop, me keeping the books. It was fragile, but it was ours, built on our own terms. For the first time, I felt like the architect of my own destiny. To make it work, I took a part-time job at a corner store. The work was monotonous, unloading boxes, stocking shelves, working the register, and the pay was a pittance, but I hoarded every dollar, dreaming of upgrading our shoestring existence. Benjamin worked longer and later, always saying it was for us. It's all for our future, he'd promise, kissing my forehead before heading out. I wanted so badly to believe him. I clung to the narrative we were writing together. Pamela's single, hesitant phone call, "Are you okay?" was met with a terse, "I'm fine," before I hung up. I didn't want her half-hearted concern or a bridge back to my parents' world. I had Benjamin. That was my family now. But only 3 months in, the foundation began to rot. Benjamin's late nights grew more frequent, his phone always face down, buzzing with notifications he'd ignore. I chalked it up to stress, to the grind of building a future. Then the anonymous message arrived on Facebook, "Your boyfriend isn't who he seems." It included specific details, times, places, that turned my blood to ice. Who sent it? A scorned ex? A so-called friend? The anonymity made it more terrifying. Doubt, once planted, grew invasive roots, twisting through my every thought. I began to see the signs I'd willfully ignored. The hushed phone calls taken outside in the cold. The unfamiliar receipt for 2 coffees, dated an evening he'd claimed to be under a car. His eyes, which once held mine with such certainty, now skittered away. A constant, low-grade nausea set in, the feeling of solid ground liquefying beneath my feet. I had sacrificed my entire history for him, my family, my home, my past, and now the future I'd traded it for was crumbling in my hands. I was desperate for the truth, yet terrified of it. The confrontation came on a night he strolled in late, his hair disheveled, the faint, sweet trace of a stranger's perfume clinging to his shirt. I stood my ground in our small kitchen, arms wrapped tight around myself, holding the chaos in. "Who are you with today?" His eyes flashed with surprise, then settled into a defensive smirk. "Just the guys from the shop," he said, casually grabbing a beer. I laid it all out, the message, the receipt, the secretive calls. His face darkened, his voice sharpened into a weapon. "You're being paranoid, Ellen. I'm not doing anything." But the words were empty. The evasion was its own confession. I felt a profound, silent snap within me. No tears, no screams, just a devastating, final clarity. "It's over," I said, my voice eerily calm. He stared, speechless for a beat, then began to sputter. "I trusted you," I continued, cutting him off. "I gave up everything for you." He reached for me, mumbling a slurry of excuses, but I stepped back, out of his reach. I couldn't spend another minute in that tomb of broken promises. I yanked the same duffel bag from my closet, stuffed in a handful of clothes, and walked out the door. His shouted protests faded into nothing behind me. Outside, the frozen street was silent. The cold penetrated deeper than any winter chill, reaching a new, hollow place inside me. I had nowhere to go. No plan. The weight of his betrayal was a physical anchor, dragging me down. I had lost my family. Now I had lost my haven. I was utterly, completely alone, standing in the dark with the pieces of my life scattered at my feet. The winter of my leaving was the coldest Fargo had ever known. After walking out on Benjamin, I wandered the streets, my duffel bag a pitiful anchor. Its physical weight was nothing compared to the leaden despair in my chest. No home. No family. No compass. The world had iced over, sidewalks vanished under drifts, the wind screamed through empty intersections, and each step forward was a battle against the cold seeping into my marrow. I was aiming for a cheap motel downtown, a rumor of a roof, but the distance stretched impossibly far. My breath plumed in desperate clouds as the single question echoed, "What now? How do you survive when you've burned every bridge behind you?" By the time I stumbled into the Main Avenue bus station, the blizzard had swallowed the city whole. The world beyond the glass was a writhing white void. Inside was barely better, a dim, hollow space where a few stranded souls hunched on benches, islands of misery. I collapsed onto one, my fingers numb, the pathetic whir of a wall heater doing little against the deep chill. The math in my head was terrifyingly simple. My meager store clerk savings might buy a few nights in that motel if I skipped food, if the storm broke. The numbers melted away faster than the snow on my boots. A sharp animal panic began to claw its way up my throat. I had willingly walked away from my family, then from Benjamin, and now I possessed nothing but the clothes on my back and a bag of memories. In a moment of pure, gutting desperation, I fumbled for my phone. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped it. The screen's glow, reflected in the frozen tracks on my cheeks, felt like the last light in the universe. Maybe, just maybe, time had thawed them. A mother's instinct, a father's protection, surely it would override their pride for one night. She answered on the second ring. "What do you want, Ellen?" Her voice was dry ice, sucking all warmth from the air. "Mom, I'm stuck. It's really bad here. Can I? Don't come back." She cut through my fractured plea, clean and surgical. "You made your choice." The finality was identical to that night on the porch, each word a needle of ice plunging deeper. I tried my father, a last, foolish hope for a softer landing. "Ellen, you heard what your mother said." His tone was flat, devoid of even anger. "Just empty. Don't call again." The dial tone was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I stared at the darkening screen, the device now a cruel monument to my own naivete. I had never felt smaller, more completely erased. Outside, the storm celebrated its victory. I sank back onto the bench, my bag a worthless lump at my feet. The weight of their dual rejection, first my parents, then Benjamin, pressed down, a physical force threatening to crack my spine. The other travelers deliberately looked through me, each wrapped in their private catastrophes. I tugged my coat collar up to my ears, a flimsy barrier against a loneliness so complete it was suffocating. Time lost meaning. There was only the howl of the wind, the rattle of snow against glass, and the rising whisper in my mind that maybe it would be easier to just walk into the white and let the cold finish what they had started. The thought was almost peaceful. "Are you all right, miss?" The voice was gravelly, worn from use. I looked up. A man in a bus driver's uniform stood there, his badge reading Patrick Lane. He had the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every kind of late-night trouble, but in them was a quiet, steady kindness. I couldn't form a word, just shook my head. He glanced at the blizzard, then back at my shattered face. "You can't stay here. Station's closing soon." "I have nowhere to go," I whispered, the confession escaping on a cloud of frost. He didn't ask for a story. He simply pulled a keyring from his pocket. "Come on," he said, his calm an anchor in the chaos. "My shift's done. I'll take you somewhere safe." Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford, but I had nothing left to lose. I followed him to his idling bus. The warmth inside was an almost painful shock. He drove with slow, deliberate care through the apocalyptic streets, the headlights carving a temporary tunnel through the white. "There's a place up here," he said after a while, pulling up to a modest, boxy building with a flickering neon sign. "Rent's weekly, not fancy. Get some rest. Everybody needs a chance to catch their breath." My "thank you" was a tremulous, broken thing. I stepped back out into the storm. He gave a small wave and the bus pulled away, its taillights soon swallowed by the snow. I stood there, watching the empty space where it had been, the neon's buzz the only sound. And there, shivering on the curb with the last of my world in a duffel bag, I felt it, a tiny, defiant spark of hope, fighting its way to life through the paralyzing cold. The kindness of a stranger in a blizzard gave me a room, but the real work of building a life had to be my own. In that sterile hotel room, with a handful of crumpled dollars on the nightstand, the truth was stark. I was starting from absolute zero. The betrayals from my family, from Benjamin, still burn like a fresh brand, but I couldn't afford the luxury of wallowing. To survive, I had to move. I had to prove, if only to myself, that I could exist without the people who had defined and then discarded me. My first lifeline was a text to Wendy Larson. We hadn't spoken much since high school, life pulling us in different directions, but her heart had always been solid gold. My fingers, stiff and clumsy from cold and shame, typed out a fractured summary of my ruin. Her reply was instantaneous, a verbal life preserver tossed into my storm. "Ellen, where are you? What happened? Come to my place. We'll figure it out together. Period." The next day, I stood at her door. Her one-bedroom apartment was a comforting mess of secondhand furniture and warmth. She didn't ask for the whole story right away. She just handed me a steaming mug and a folded stack of cash, $200, a fortune to me then. "It's not much, but it's yours now," she said, cutting off my protests with a firm look. "You're not alone." Okay. Those 3 words were the foundation I rebuilt upon. With Wendy's help, I found a studio on the ragged edge of Fargo. It was a bleak little box, peeling paint, a faucet that dripped a mournful rhythm, windows that rattled with every gust of wind. But it was mine. The rent devoured almost all I had, chaining me to the corner store for endless, grueling shifts. The work was demeaning and exhausting, rude customers, aching feet, the soul-deadening monotony of scanning groceries. But it was a lifeline. Wendy became my regular check-in, appearing with bags of groceries or dragging me out for cheap diner fries when the shadows under my eyes grew too dark. "You're stronger than you think," she'd insist, and her unwavering belief became a tiny, sacred flame I sheltered within. I knew survival wasn't enough. I wanted a future. I'd always had a head for numbers, a talent my parents had dismissed as useless unless it calculated a prestigious GPA. Now I weaponized it. I enrolled in night classes for accounting at the community college. Juggling work and school meant existing on coffee and 4 hours of sleep. My evenings were spent in the silent, fluorescent purgatory of the library, my world narrowed to textbooks and problem sets. It was there I built a new dream. A future of stability, of a career, of not having to mentally calculate the cost of a loaf of bread. One evening, my stern but brilliant instructor handed back a midterm. At the top, next to a grade that made my breath catch, she'd scribbled, "You have potential, Ellen." I stared at those words until they blurred. Potential. Not a disappointment. Not a cast-off. It was a seed of a new identity. Then a letter arrived. Its neat, precise handwriting a shock to my system, Pamela. "I'm sorry for how things turned out," she wrote, the apology careful and measured. Enclosed was $50 of her own money, not our parents'. "You're stronger than you think. You don't need them, sis." The letter sat heavy in my hands, stirring a complicated storm of grief and resentment. When she called a week later, her voice soft with regret, offering help, no conditions, I thanked her but kept my guard up. I used the money for groceries, but didn't write back. Trust, especially family trust, was a bridge I couldn't afford to cross again. I needed the clean, hard lines of the life I was building myself. The grind became my rhythm. Dawn shifts, evening classes, collapsing into bed only to do it again. Wendy was my constant. One night, over a shared pizza at her place, she lifted her glass of soda. "To you, Ellen," she said, her smile bright and sure. "You're doing it." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I smiled back, a real, unforced smile that reached my eyes. I was still fractured. The ghosts of my parents' final words and Benjamin's deceit still whispered in my quiet moments. But I was in motion. My shabby apartment, my terrible job, my dog-eared textbooks, they weren't just circumstances. They were choices. They were proof. I was learning, step by painful, deliberate step, to trust the one person I had left, myself. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time, I was the one holding the map. 5 years have a way of smoothing jagged edges, of building something solid from dust. When I look back now, the girl I was shivering at a bus stop with a single duffel bag and a shattered heart feels like someone from a story I once heard. I finished my accounting courses, not just passing but excelling. That effort landed me a job at one of Fargo's largest firms. My office has a window. I often pause there, looking out at the city's skyline, a view that silently narrates the distance I've traveled from those frozen, desperate streets. Home is no longer a temporary shelter. I share a cozy, sunlit house with Nathan Cole, a high school history teacher with a calming presence and a laugh that feels like coming home. We met in a coffee shop, bonding over a shared dislike for overly sour brews. He is kind, steady, and his love is a quiet, consistent force that asks nothing of me but to be myself. We cook messy dinners, plan adventures on a worn-out map, and talk about a future that isn't a desperate escape, but a gentle, welcome reality. For the first time, my happiness isn't a reaction or a rebellion. It's simply my life. The same cannot be said for my parents. This spring, a message from Pamela flickered on my phone. Mom and Dad want to see you. They regret it. Period. I felt a cold ripple, a mixture of old anger and a vast, hollow indifference. Regret. The word felt cheap against the memory of a slammed door, a mother's icy ultimatum, a father's silent complicity as a blizzard swallowed me whole. Pamela tried again, a letter expressing their longing. I did not respond. When she called, my voice was firm, a tone I'd forged in solitude. They made their choice, Pamela. They don't get to rewrite it now that they're lonely. I spent years rebuilding from the rubble they left. I won't let their guilt become my problem. They lost their daughter for good. The silence on their end of town is their penance, a quiet house filled with the echoes of their own pride. Benjamin's fate, I learned through Wendy, was its own kind of ruin. His dream garage collapsed under debt and poor choices within a year. He lives alone now, in a place not unlike the one we shared, but emptier. Wendy mentioned he'd asked after me, his voice thick with remorse. My number has been blocked for years. His regret is his to carry. His betrayal was the final, brutal push I needed to learn I could walk entirely on my own. While I built a future, he remained anchored in the past, a prisoner of his own making. That night in the blizzard was a crucible. It didn't just change me, it forged me. I was once a girl starving for approval, measuring my worth by the impossible standards of a critical family and the false promises of a dishonest man. Leaving them was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done, but it was the only way to find my own breath, my own voice. Every grueling store shift, every late night hunched over a textbook in a silent library, every lonely moment in that first bleak apartment, they weren't punishments. They were the bricks and mortar of the woman I am now. I learned to find my value within, not in the reflections of those who looked at me and saw only a disappointment or a diversion. The pain was real. Their rejection and his betrayal left scars. But they taught me the most vital lesson. My strength was never theirs to give or take away. It was mine all along. I nurtured it with Wendy's friendship, with Nathan's love, and with my own stubborn resilience. My life stands as evidence that choosing yourself is not an act of selfishness, but the ultimate act of salvation. The core of it all is this: you must be the guardian of your own worth. Never plead for love from those who are bankrupt of it. My parents chose their social standing over their child and now dine on silence. Benjamin chose momentary excitement and was left with nothing but ghosts. I chose myself, and in doing so, I built a life I genuinely love. This path isn't paved with ease. It's lined with sleepless nights, with fear, with the ache of solitude. But that ache is cleaner, truer, than the soul-crushing weight of begging for a place in a toxic family or clinging to a lying partner. Walking away required every ounce of courage I possessed, but in return, it gifted me a strength I never dreamed I had. If my story has found you, if you're listening while holding your own private hurt, know this: you are not obligated to cherish the hands that wound you. Your loyalty belongs to your own survival, your own peace. Build your own path. It will be lonely at the start. The road will be steep. But the view from the summit, the life you build for yourself, by yourself, is worth every difficult step. Thank you for walking this road with me. Sharing this journey has meant more than I can say. Now, I'm turning it over to you. What would you have done? What have your own battles taught you about walking away or standing your ground? Your story matters. Your voice is as crucial as mine was on the day I decided my ending would be my own beginning.